Good morning or good afternoon to everybody. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined today by computer scientist, composer, musician, author, and general philosopher, Jaron Lanier. For those who don't know, he is somebody who's been around technology and Silicon Valley in particular since what I think of as the founding generation. I don't know if you think of it as the founding generation, but somebody who can give us, real insight into not just the world that we live in today and much of what we're, kind of living through, which that sounded loud, but also, kind of context and history about, where this moment sits in a much longer story around technology and innovation in the world. He's written books. The most recent one was 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. I will confess that my one remaining social media account was Instagram. I made it to about page 8 of Argument 1 before I deactivated that account. So persuasive was the name of the game.
Somewhere in Silicon... Do I have to turn it on? Hello.
I think we're good.
Oh, that's just for this. All right. Somewhere in Silicon Valley, a CEO has a tear coming out.
Clearly that person had never seen my social media account, because had they seen it, I don't think they would have been missing
they
it.
would be happy. Okay.
Like my 1,000 children doing different things, like eating ice cream and skiing. But most probably famously known for your early work around VR, and with the Apple Vision Goggle Pro that we have now. I think we're all very interested to hear the sort of the arc of VR in the world and your experience with it and how things have sort of turned out. But I think most kind of intimately would love to start with a sense of you. And I know you had a very unique upbringing, and your love of both math and music and arts, which we've talked about a little bit. Kind of informing the way that you think about the world. How'd you kind of get started? Tell us a little bit about early years.
Woo! Well, long ago, I was born there. I was born in Harlem Hospital, but I had terrible allergies, which I still have. I just walked across the street and I don't know what it is here. I'm sure it's coming from New Jersey, whatever it is. And
we do love New Jersey here at Standard, so I'm not going to laugh at that one.
I still have a bit of loyalty to Manhattan, so I have to say that. And so from the age of 6 months or something, I was raised in the deserts of southern New Mexico. And I used to go across the border to school in Mexico, because that's where the closest school was. So and then one thing that was very unusual for that time is my mom was the breadwinner, not my dad. And she used to play the market remotely from there. She was a Holocaust survivor. And she died in a car accident when I was little, leaving my dad without really a way to support us. So we were homeless for a while. We set up tents, and there was extremely cheap land to be had in the desert, so we got some land and lived in tents for years and gradually built a house.
Wow.
And my dad got certified to teach elementary school after a while.
Did you hire a famous architect for that house? No.
Yeah, of course. And we had an anti-gravity device. So it didn't have to contact the ground, and it was fabulous. No, I designed the house, and it was a weird house with all kinds of strange shapes. Some were geodesic domes, and some were other forms. I was 11. And I think, and part of it fell down later, but maybe 15 or 20 years later, part of it fell down, and which is a good reason not to let an 11-year-old design a house, because it did have all kinds of crazy cantilevered elements and all. When it fell down, that did motivate me to become a little more careful about engineering, which I think came maybe a bit late for me, but it's been helpful. And It was a fabulous, weird house. Everybody would say it looks like an alien spacecraft that has landed, and it did.
Super cool.
Yeah, and I mean, there are many more stories I could tell, but through a circuitous route, I ended up in Silicon Valley and doing initially in the very nascent video game industry. And I was a researcher for Atari. Does anybody remember Atari?
Of course.
In a long, long time ago. And then I did freelance games, and I was successful. I had a top game, and the money from that went into the creation of something called virtual reality. And I had the first VR startup. And actually, oh God, I wanted to show you a picture, but there's no way to show it to everybody here. But what's kind of cool is Johnny Ive, who designed the Apple Vision Pro, decided to make it a tribute to my first headset.
Is that right?
Do you want to see a picture?
I do, absolutely.
Hold on. And I don't know how to show this to all of you. Wait. Oh my God, Apple, come on, let me out. I'm trying to get this. I am so sorry.
Tell me where to go.
I feel, no, it's not online.
Oh.
I should possibly, it's very possible it should be online, but I've never done that. Wait. It's here. This is here. That's an Apple Vision Pro, and then
Wow.
the black one is a 1984 iPhone.
For those not in the room, I'm sorry, but for those in the room, that is shockingly close.
Yeah, they're the same. They're so the Apple. So that's the black one is a 1984 commercially available head-mounted display that cost even more than an Apple Vision Pro, much more in its day, and was actually not so bad. Like if you could get one working now, which I can't because there are too many pieces you'd have to connect to it that aren't available anymore. But you would recognize it as the same sort of thing, lower resolution. But it was there.
I've heard you talk about sort of the and a little early tangent, but talk about sort of the physicality of the goggles and just kind of the push to make them sort of like this as opposed to being goggles and your thoughts being a little different than this.
Well, I have this feeling like the industry has it wrong that. You shouldn't sell a product and then be embarrassed of your product. So like my feeling is if you're going to wear something on your head, like be proud of that weird thing on your head. Like you wouldn't sell somebody a motorcycle and say, hey, you can pretend it's a bicycle. We put this bicycle decal on it so you don't have to say you're on a motorcycle. You say, no, hey, it's my motorcycle. It's a big motorcycle. It's got weird shapes on it. And so I'm kind of a believer that the headsets, they should be lightweight. That's a different question. But I think they should be flamboyant.
Yeah.
The Apple one shows a picture of your eye to the outside, which is not a terrible idea. But I'd always wanted to show your avatar. So you could also use it as a variable mask. Yeah. And I want feathers and lightning bolts on it. And I want a Tesla coil sparking on top.
I love that.
And I think they should be flamboyant. I think you should, if you're gonna do it, do it. Yeah. Be proud of it.
I love that.
And I think there's also a emotional thing, because the idea is that if you make them like glasses, there's a sneaky feeling. Is that person, are those glasses filming me or not? Is that person up to something? Are they seeing information about me? Is this weirdo who's trying to pick me up looking at my home address now or something? There's a feeling of lack of symmetry. And I think it's more positive just to be I am wearing this fucking thing. Pardon my language. This is who I am. This is what I'm doing. Yeah. I am flamboyantly a nerd.
I love it. I love it.
Accept me or not. And I think we should do that. I don't like you wouldn't say, oh, here's this wonderful solar roofing, but now we're going to give you this big doily to put over your house because nobody wants to see. It's ridiculous.
No, we want everybody to know that they have solar roofing.
Yeah, why not? What's wrong with that?
That's true.
So, yeah.
Just two things. One, just frankly, personally, I was really taken with sort of, your love of the arts, generally speaking, music specifically, but art as well, and how you've thought of that, kind of impacting your career, your philosophy, your engagement with technology.
So let me make a pre-confession. You're on the board of the Met Museum.
Yeah.
if anybody breaks in and steals rare musical instruments,
I know the guy.
It's me. Yeah. So I want to confess in advance to save you the work.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
The address, please.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You'll. So, yeah. I'm a composer as well. And it's not possible to do everything, but I've been actively performing, and obviously the pandemic shut things down quite a bit, and a lot on the other side of it hasn't really come back. But it's good. It's good, and I've also done a lot of orchestra work, some soundtracks and whatnot.
That's
But
terrific.
as a performer, I play the piano,
Sure.
but I also play a zillion instruments, many of them really rare acoustic instruments from different cultures and different periods. So I don't know, my daughter tried to count them a while ago, something like 1,500 instruments.
That's a lot.
But I'm not a collector. I don't get anything that I won't play. So I actually can, they're not all necessarily set up for playing at any given moment, but I play everything there. Like I already bought one in New York City this trip.
Great.
I'm always trying to find some other obscure thing and then learning how to play it.
Yeah.
It's just madness. I think it's cheaper than heroin.
Some of them.
Yeah. Well, so that's what I do.
Good.
And I spent many an hour when I was younger in the instrument collection at the Met, and I used to volunteer with the
really
curators there,
That's really cool.
helping to document them and whatnot.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Turning a little bit back to Silicon Valley and your sort of, long time engagement and, proximity. I've seen you described as the dismal optimist, and obviously technologist is one way to describe you, but, kind of a realistic skeptic of the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes with a lot of this. And really kind of, what I found most fascinating, most important, and most personal was your sort of value of humanity in the context of so much of the digitalization and technology that we're talking about. The Silicon Valley you showed up into however many decades ago, and the one today. Talk us through a little bit sort of what's changed, what hasn't changed, and sort of your experience there.
Yeah, that's a fascinating topic, and I don't think anyone's ever really done a proper social history of Silicon Valley, and it's needed. So when I showed up there was the late 70s. Sounds weird to say that, but it's true. A mere half century ago. And the culture then was a sort of a weird mix of techie hippie. There was a very strong 60s hippie vibe. And in fact, if you look at photos of the Silicon Valley people that started companies like Apple and Microsoft, they look very hippie. Which I still do, because I'll just be who I am. But, that was very common in those days. And the question, though, is, aside from just outer appearances and being into the Beatles and whatever, that sort of thing, what did that actually mean? Did that actually turn into any idea or anything of influence? And that's never really been clear. There's always been a cluster of contradictory notions about that. So in the early days, there was a sense, well, we're hippies, we're anti-capitalist, we're going to live in collective communal houses, we're going to change the whole world order and be these super idealistic people. But you know what? We want to go after the big corporations. We're going to replace them, and we're going to be great entrepreneurs. We're going to get rich. And okay, those two ideas don't really go together. You can't, and you can live contradictions, but you should at least admit it. And the thing is, nobody ever admitted it. So it's a very peculiar situation. So we did dethrone the existing tech company order, which in those days was companies like IBM, which is still around, but, obviously not what it was. Yeah. And these weird little bands of hippies with these little chips and little personal computers, we undid it all, and we were very proud of it. Yeah. I was, in those days, I was more in the Apple camp. I used to have quite an antagonistic thing with Bill Gates when we were young. It's kind of funny. And not anymore. The Apple group that made the Macintosh, which came out in '84, immediately came over to help me write the first VR operating system for the black headset,
Wow.
which is called an iPhone, by the way, but EYE.
Oh.
So the first commercial virtual reality headset was called an
I didn't know
iPhone,
that.
which then, and Jobs at the time said, well, we're going to sell one of these someday. And that's always been on the Apple long-term plan. And we talked about how long it would take Apple to sell one, and our guess in 1984 was 2010.
Wow.
Which, given how, probably, not that bad, I guess.
Yeah, no.
But anyway, the Mac team came over to work with me, so I was like very close with Apple in those days. You might, in the early Apple iconography, there's like this hand that you see, and that was a reference to the hand in virtuality, because we used to do, we didn't have game controllers. They didn't exist yet. Everything was
And wasn't there
hand.
the Nintendo glove at some point?
We did do a cheap glove as a consumer product that worked with the old Nintendo machine. Yeah, Mattel sold it. It was called the Power Glove.
Yes.
And it became kind of iconic in the late 80s. They sucked.
Yeah.
I mean, they were terrible. And I think maybe they could have been better. It's hard to say. It was really hard to do. Like, just the very idea of doing a cheap device of that kind in those days was so audacious that it existed at all was sort of a miracle.
Sure.
A funny story is that the Japanese distributor of the Power Glove got indicted for some kind of mob activity I never quite understood. And so there's a warehouse sitting on nationally owned land that in the middle of railroad tracks in Tokyo that has 1 million Power Gloves that's been held up in litigation since that time. So it's like 40-something years later, and there's still 1 million Power Gloves sitting in a warehouse.
That's very funny.
In Tokyo.
That's funny.
And so my fantasy is that some hostile aliens will arrive and they will say, we will spare us if you can give us 1 million VR gloves. And say, oh, right there, they're there. Anyway, that was.
Before we move on, in Silicon Valley, obviously, kind of the lack of structure that existed in the late '70s is sort of almost the antithesis today.
Very much so.
How do you think that has either helped or inhibited or both innovation, technology, startups? I mean, has it been a good thing overall, or is it too nuanced to?
I have. It's a complex. The answer to that is not simple.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about what was better then. One thing that was better is that everybody had to make it all up. Like, venture capital firms did exist, but nobody quite knew what that meant.
Yeah.
So there were just a few. They were making it up, and nobody quite knew how to do the whole thing. And what I love about that is that when you went in to talk to a venture capital firm, there was no preconception of like, well, this is a good way to think. This is a good sign of what a tech entrepreneur looks like. Everything was blank slate. And without that, if the current Silicon Valley existed back then, but VR didn't, and somebody came up and said, hey, I want to do this thing where people put this thing on their head and they're in this world. No way. It wouldn't happen. Like, the current Silicon Valley has a self-perception of being very radical and very forward-thinking and very open-minded. But in fact, in my opinion, it's become very doctrinaire.
Yeah.
There's a certain mindset and a certain feeling about what's important and how to think about the world. And if you don't fit into that, you can be pretty lonely. But then on the other hand, in those days, I wanted these headsets to exist and gloves because there was no way we were going to be able to track a hand with machine vision in the early 80s. It just wasn't possible. So we needed manufacturing. Where are these things going to get made? Where are these gloves going to get made? There's never been a product like it. So you can't call up China and say, oh, hello, uncomfortable regime. Could you please manufacture this thing for me very, very cheap? That would be nice of you. Thank you. You can't. There was no option of that kind. So we started our own factory which is inconceivable now, on the peninsula. We hired people who had previously been working in the auto factory across the way that now makes Teslas, but in those days was making what was that thing called? I forget. There was like a auto consortium there, and we hired people who'd been seamstresses. We hired people who had been watch repair people. Like, we hired all these people, and we couldn't train them. We had to figure out how to do it. So we started an assembly line for this totally new kind of product. How do you make the lenses? We have to grind lenses.
Yeah.
Crazy. And we did it. We made this stuff. We had all these people. I still feel bad about that having closed. Like, I would rather, what I think would be great is if there was this big factory there and then Apple would be making their thing in it instead of in China. I think that would be so cool, but that's not the way things worked out.
It resonates. So we have our rooftop solar business.
Mm-hmm.
We did our first pilot plant in San Jose. Not exactly as you did, but manufacturing our rooftop solar. Our second one's opening up in Georgetown outside of Austin. But these are American-made products and definitely made for the American market. So a lot of pride there. VR, the godfather of. VPL was that business for you?
Yeah, I had a terrible name for my startup, which was VPL, which stood for Virtual Programming Language, because the idea back then, we weren't so much, the hardware was just a necessary thing that you'd have to make, but the real thing was I wanted people to be in the simulation and just be able to ask for any simulation they wanted in real time. Like, could you please make a DNA strand, and then I need to have this other reagent, and just like simulate this whole thing for me, and it would just appear. So that was the virtual programming language. So, and of course, in those days, I was very premature. We didn't get very far. Now, it's starting to become feasible. So 40 years later, I'm trying to complete that agenda with what we call AI. But that was the original idea. And of course, VPL is a terrible name. Nobody remembers it. But that's what I did.
It's been described as sort of perpetually premature. Do you think that that's different now with Apple or with kind of technology broadly speaking, or time will tell?
I would like it to be always premature.
Right.
Like
I love that.
I don't like this idea that
arriving.
One of the problems of Silicon Valley arrogance is that everybody before us, and this is true today, and it was true 40 years ago, everybody before us didn't know what they were doing. We're the smart ones.
Right.
We're really bright, young, technical kids, and we're going to solve it, and then it'll be done. And all future generations will just accept that we fixed it, and then history's over, and we've done it right this time, and that's it. Yeah. And like, maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe not. And so I like this idea of showing the generosity and optimism and faith that future generations will have ideas too, and that there'll be a continuity of creativity indefinitely. I think that if you don't believe in that, it's hard to really be pro-human, Yeah. It's like, well, we're the creative, brilliant generation, but everybody else in the future, they'll be kept as pets by the AI we give them, or something like, it's not a good way to think about the future, about human identity.
Kind of VR, at least, in my limited experience, has sort of been described as both, 50s, 60s dystopian type stuff to a utopian, escape from reality. Where does it sort of fit in that spectrum for you?
Well, I would like to think of it as, both the utopian people and the dystopian people tend to think of VR as this thing you just go into and you're in all the time. And so in a way they land in the same place. And I think that's a terrible way to think about VR, and I always have. The coolest moment in VR is when you take off the headset and then you have a bit of a freshened perception of reality, in my opinion. Try it yourself if you ever have one. Just notice that moment. And I think you'll notice that moment when you take it off is actually way cool and the best thing about it. And so if you find that to be true, I don't know if you will, but give it a try, you might, then you might also recognize that the best way to use VR is sporadically rather than constantly. In Silicon Valley, everybody wants to get the new iPhone or the new social media or just something that grabs the whole population all the time, where you can be the hub or the platform for whatever anybody else has to do, where you become the god of all commerce and all culture. Because once you win one of those things,
you win.
That's like a big win.
Yeah.
So that's where the company Meta is, and they want to repeat it now with VR. Or he wants to repeat it with VR. It's a one-person company. Or Apple obviously would like to repeat it with VR, and they did it with these smartphones. And but I think there's another business model that's also good, and it's Napa Valley, not Silicon Valley, which is instead of trying to be Coca-Cola and being this universal thing that's everywhere, be fine wine, which is this thing that's a lower volume, higher margin thing that people use sporadically, and yet is also a great business.
Yeah.
And I don't think there should just be one business model of the future, which is own everything always fully. That's like a stupid business model because it ultimately has to implode.
Yeah.
Because it's counter market.
Sure.
Like you can't, if you totally dominate a market, it can last for a while, but it's ultimately contradictory with the very idea of a market. What's much better is to have a market that's growing and changing in which you have a wonderful niche,
Yeah.
And so I think VR could be more like that. And that's the message I'm trying to give to my illustrious colleagues in Silicon Valley.
Well, you just gave me a perfect transition.
Okay.
Because want to kind of turn to very kind of current and relevant topics of AI and social media and some of your thoughts there. Maybe we can sort of start by, talking about artificial intelligence. I know you think it's probably a misnomer in the intelligence category, but, would love to circle back to what you were just talking about, which is some of the business models around all of this, and maybe an initial sin, if you want to call that, with the internet, where we all expected our kind of information for free and our music for free and our friends for free, and what the unintended consequence was of what became the product.
Well, there's a lot.
There's
to
a lot
say
there,
about that. And
but I know you have
a few different questions in one question.
Why don't we start with artificial intelligence, if you want?
So there's a long history to the idea of artificial intelligence. There have been two camps in technology history, one of which has been it's all just people. And if we try to anthropomorphize the machines, it'll just make it harder for us to use them well or to be good engineers, because we lose our objectivity. Like if you're creating an entity, how do you test if it's good or not? It suddenly has its own integrity, and you can't just measure it in a normal way. Like if you want your program to be a creature, that whether it's a creature or not doesn't actually accomplish anything. And so you've created a criterion that isn't about benefits, and it also isn't measurable, and so it becomes sort of religious, It's like and so therefore it's a bad idea. Plus it freaks people out and feels icky. And then the other camp is, no, we're going to build this creature, it'll become super smart, and it's the only thing that matters. We're not smart enough to solve climate change, so we're going to get this super smart artificial entity to do it, and if it kills us all, it doesn't matter because it'll be better anyway, and maybe it'll kill us all, whatever. And that's the other camp. Now, I'm very much in the first camp, and the first camp, there's an incredible, interesting, long social history about the two camps. The most influential person in the opposing camp was also my most important mentor, whose name was Marvin Minsky. And the dystopian science fiction often came from people who talked to him, because he knew Asimov and Clarke and all these people and helped influence the narrative about AI back in the day. Mm-hmm. And I have a personal connection there because before I was born, my dad had been the science fact editor for Hugo Gernsback's magazines. And Hugo Gernsback was the great science fiction golden age entrepreneur who had the magazines Fantastic, Amazing, and Astounding, in which people like Isaac Asimov and Arthur Clarke and Philip K. Dick were publishing their stories back then, and he would write the science fact piece at the back of the magazine about, well, here's what we really know about Mars or whatever. So he knew all those people. So aside from knowing Marvin, I also knew some of the people through my dad, and I have a pretty good picture of what happened there. Marvin and his friends had an incredible rivalry with this person named Norbert Wiener, who'd been very much on my side of things and invented the term cybernetics and wrote books about how if you believed machines were coming alive, what you'd really do is end up just manipulating other people to support the illusion. It would be bad. One of his books is called The Human Use of Human Beings, and it approximately describes the abuses that we see on social media now, and it's from 1950.
Wow.
And there's a similar warning from 1907, decades before Turing, even from. Well, anyway, I won't. The novelist Forster, who wrote *Room of the View* and *Remains of the Day* and all this, he wrote a book called *The Machine Stops,* foreseeing everything as well. So, like the alternative. This idea of the danger of making technology be justified for itself and how that would harm people is a very old concern. At any rate, there have been these incredible rivalries. The AI people won. Now, the reason the AI people won actually goes back to, and the term AI was actually made up precisely because in 1958 at a conference at Dartmouth, precisely because Norbert Wiener's term cybernetics was becoming so well known. They said we need our own rhetoric to fight this guy, and AI came out of that. So going back to this, we were talking about the conflict between hippie communism and high-tech capitalism, and how so that let's zoom ahead 20-ish years. And now the internet exists, and there's starting to be internet companies. And so Google was an early one, and they started as some students at Stanford who were unbelievably cute in the day. I mean, they really were. And if anybody's counting, I sold them their first VR company, but I mean, I sold them their first AI company.
Is that right?
Yeah. I had figured out how to track facial features for recognition and also generate deep fakes of people talking stuff in the 90s.
Wow.
Which turned into some scenes in the movie Minority Report.
Yeah,
and that stuff was working, and I sold it to Sergey and Larry.
That's
way
cool.
back.
Very cool.
Nobody knew what it was going to become. They didn't have a business model yet. But then the time came for Google to have a business model. What would it be? And so, well, are we a communitarian paradise, or are we going to take over a gigantic market and become fabulously rich? Which is it? What are we going to do? And so the answer was, both are indispensable, so we'll just do them both. Well, how can you do that? And the answer is, well, we'll be two things at once. The users will experience a communitarian paradise where it's good to share and everything's free. And if we at the turn of the century, there were 500,000 working musicians in the United States who did well enough to own homes and put kids through college based on their music careers. And the current number, so far as I can tell, is under 1,000. Huh. So it's a difference. It's something of a difference.
It's a big difference.
But okay, fine. We'll demonetize whole sectors that didn't ask us for any help. But it'll be good because everyone will share, and it's great. It'll be paradise. It's communitarian paradise. Oh, but then how will you make money? You're a corporation. I'm investing in you. How will it happen? You want to list yourself on Wall Street. How will this work? Oh, well, the real customers are these other people, and the people who will pay us money are paying for access and influence. And I said, oh, okay, but how will that work? Very complicated auction system. No one will really be able to track it. I said, well, if you're taking over communication, is paying for access kind of blackmail-y? It's not like traditional advertising, certainly. Traditional advertising is a form of communication. This is a little different. This is sort of like the very plumbing of information in the world. It's a different kind of thing. might there be any side effects? So we were talking about this stuff back then. But anyway, that's obviously what happened.
Yeah.
And one of the things about that is the way math works is that if you have a bunch of nodes connected in an information system that depend on each other for information, nodes that are connected to more other nodes will become more valuable on whatever the terms are than ones that are connected to fewer nodes. And so therefore, there'll tend to be more and more accumulation of whichever nodes got started as having a bit of an advantage. And that's called the network effect. It's a term that was originally invented for the analog phone network, but it's super strong in the digital world. We call it virality these days. But what it means is that you'll have a very small number of top players who become super dominant in a monopoly-like way. Whether it is a monopoly, I leave to regulators to worry about. But you tend to have this thing happen, and it's so. Back to AI. If you dig into the guts of so I don't like the term AI, as you can tell. I think it's all just a giant human collaboration. When we make something, I'm happy about ChatGPT. I'm not here representing Microsoft. I have the freedom to speak against it, but were I wearing the other hat, I would be called the prime scientist of Microsoft, and I'd be on your case like, buy more Microsoft stuff. It'll be great for your business. But I'm not doing that. I'm here as an individual intellectual, but I wouldn't be doing what I do on that side with that hat on if I didn't think that we're generating value for people. I'm sure we are, but I don't like the fantasy that it's a person, and I really don't. I don't think it helps anybody, but I prefer to think of it as a new kind of collaboration, a little like a Wikipedia. We take everybody's work, we do a higher level of correlation, so you can find hidden correlations between what people have done before to help you do whatever you're doing now, if it bears any similarity to what people did before. I think that's fabulous. I think that civilization should do that. But network effect. So in order to do the training of AI models, we use techniques such as the famous gradient descent or the transformer model or diffusion models. Maybe if any of you follow AI, these will be familiar terms. You don't need to know what they are really, but the thing is, when we're gathering everybody's data and we're sort of processing it together and doing statistics on how it all relates, all the little points of data connect to each other in this giant statistical mush that we create. If we just do it naively, this same problem of virality will appear, and which ruins it. Then you don't get anything that functions. You have to bat down the virality inside the model in order to get at the combination of factors rather than just letting one dominate. That's like when we spend all this money making these giant models, the biggest expense is batting down internal virality to get at the combination. That's the secret. That's the key to doing it. And yet once we let the models out there, we don't do that. And so out there in the world, every kid on social media is hoping to be the virality winner, even though it's random and only a few will, and it makes them all insane.
When you sort of think about, AI and the black box nature of it and the terrifying outcomes, I've heard you talk a lot about data dignity and provenance and, a role that could play in solving and maybe bringing it back to the sort of the human collaborative tool that you hope. Tell us about that.
So I am on a campaign to transform how the AI world works. I have a seat at the table, but only one seat, and I have not convinced all of my peers that I'm right about this. I find that the more I talk about it out in the world and write about it, the better I seem to do in getting through to my peers, because ultimately us nerds are very insecure, and if something comes around to us through the outside world, it sometimes is better than when we talk to each other, because we secretly think all of the others don't really get it and we're the only smart one. And so the idea here is a pretty simple one. Right now, when we make a big information system, we make it forget who provided information into it. For instance, on the internet itself, if somebody puts information up there, there's no intrinsic record of where that information came from. And in a way, what Google did was recreate that information as a commercial effort to fill that hole. That's one way to interpret what Google's index was. Not precise, but close. When we make a big AI model, we've chosen to do the same. And by the way, the original internet designs all did include that kind of record. It was left out deliberately in both the original internet and the World Wide Web design. And this is called backlinks, so you know where stuff came from. And that led to our world of fraud and deep fakes and uncertainty.
Was that for efficiency reasons or speed reasons, or was there a philosophy behind it?
Both things are true. When it all started, computation was expensive, and leaving out the backlinks did make it easier. But the people who made the original internet protocol, which at that time was the DARPANET protocol, assumed that the backlinks would be created the next level up universally, and all proposals included that. At the time the World Wide Web started, all of the alternatives to Tim Berners-Lee's version of it did include the backlinks. Tim's did spread virally precisely because it was easier. I don't think he's thrilled with how that came out. In fact, he's been trying to come up with an alternative and a replacement for all these years, and now it's too late. His idea for an alternate one is called Solid, and it's too late. It's hard, you know. That was a gigantic mistake. But so it started off, efficiency was definitely part of the reason, but it wasn't the only one. There was very quickly an ideological feeling, too, where people, just like with AI today, they wanted to think of the internet as coming alive. Like, for instance, on the Wikipedia, why don't we have true names of anyone who contributed? Well, in some cases, it's a journalist working in a hostile place. Well, there are cases like that. Accommodation should be made, but why is the default anonymity? And it's because everybody thought the Wikipedia would turn into the new AI, or, you know, there's always this idea that if we anonymize ourselves, we could have this fantasy that we're creating this new entity. And so when we finally started to get AI to work a while ago, which was just kind of futzing around with a lot of different ways of doing statistics until one of them came together, which is called the transformer model. And you might say, I'm not that impressed with it, and it's true, I'm not. If you actually look at the math of how these things work, we futzed around until we got one that would work, but we all knew it would because it made sense, and I'm not all that impressed with what we do. It doesn't mean that I don't see the value in it, but it's not like, I mean, I don't know. I'm a little, I think a little humility would go a long way in tech culture. But at any rate, once again, we said, well, we're going to take in all this data, but we're not going to track it. And so what I'm saying is that, well, why don't we start tracking it? Like, for instance, let's say, and I'm not saying I know precisely how to do this, because this is actually a not entirely solved technical challenge, but we know a lot about how to do it. Let's say for one of the generations of large model AI, it takes about a year to make one, and an amount of effort that's astonishing, like a gigantic computation, takes multiple city-size computer facilities a year to calculate one of these things. All right, so you get one. What if during the course of it, you lay down little breadcrumbs inside it so you can say, well, here was this document from this person. We have a record of it, and we're going to trace it all the way through. So now when somebody asks for some text to be generated or an image or now movie clips or whatever, we can go back and we can say the top 12 contributors of the original. No, we can't do all of them because everything contributes a little bit, but just like with virality, there's a steep fall off. And so we could say, hey, these are the primary ones. That's how the math works. And what are the benefits of that? Well, one thing is that these days we say, oh, please, AI, don't do something horribly destructive. Don't help someone calculate a virus that would be a doomsday virus that would kill everybody and be highly contagious. Don't do it. Just don't do it. And so the way we do that is what are called guardrails. And so we try to stop certain prompts on the way in and certain results on the way out and certain types of training information. That's all to the good. We have to do that. And I'm very proud that so far as we know, nothing particularly horrible has happened in the last, I don't know how long it's been, year and a half or two since large models have been released. I don't know of anything. We'll see what happens with the election cycle and deep fakes, but we haven't seen the horrible virus created and so on. And there's been astonishing effort into preventing that. But there's another way to do it, which is like if you had this trace inside it, even if somebody was very clever, and people are really clever trying to contravene the guardrails, and if somebody said, "I'm not asking for a bomb, I'm just asking for a cake recipe," but they couch it in such a way they can get bomb information out of it. Well, if the antecedent documents that you trace down include something about bombs, you got them. You have an X-ray into intent that you otherwise don't have. You're not dealing with a black box anymore. So, but then the other thing, and this is the thing that terrifies people, is you'd ruin the illusion that it's not a human that it's not a human collaboration in this new thing, and then somebody might say, "Hey, I contributed a lot to this thing that was valuable. Why am I not getting paid?" And I think they should get paid. Like, my feeling is that we'll need more and more types of data going into new kinds of AI for all kinds of new crazy things. Maybe we'll need to grow new limbs to live in outer space, flying around. And where's that going to come from? It'll come from a research community that feeds example limbs into the new AI that'll custom bioprint our new limbs for us. GPT-6 isn't going to do that because it doesn't have data for it, but GPT-12 or something, maybe it'll do that, but only if we motivate a community of people to generate data. So, like, why not motivate new creative communities of people providing data that AI can then utilize, as opposed to new dependent communities who have to get a basic income and shutting down the market entirely, which so I just think it's a better approach.
Got it. Well, I know there's going to be a lot of questions for you here, and I want to save time. But before we get to that, I think the title of your latest book kind of gives us a good hint, but wanted to talk a little bit about social media. Curious about sort of just the amplification of negativity in the algorithms on social media, and, how we should think about that,
So I've been writing about how social media is doing damage to people for quite a long time, for more than 20 years. And I did have a book out, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago or something. Maybe, God, longer. Sheesh, time. But it was called 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now, talking about damage. It was one of
we have it right here.
Yeah, so it was an early example of that sort of thing. Since then, there are a lot of people doing that. And my friend Tristan Harris is out there doing it, and many others. And this, at the time I did it, it was based on less rigorous science because it hadn't been done yet. But at this point, there's been enough science that I think you have to really be willfully foolish to not see the consistent results. And some are. But at any rate, we're screwing our kids. And I have a teenage daughter, and I see it so clearly. And it's terrible. It's self-destructive. We know what we're doing. We're doing it. It's dumb. It's to no purpose. It's horrible. I don't know what to say. I mean, everybody knows it now. It's no secret. It doesn't require me to introduce you to the ideas because they're out there. The only question is, will we ever get it together to do something about this? It's very obvious.
Well, listen, for those who haven't read the book, please go get and read the book. And there's a lot in there that makes kind of the conclusion obvious, as you say. But the one thing that was, I think, verbalized in a way that I hadn't, at least inside, was, I think a lot of people think of social media as a means of self-expression and individualism. And maybe, when you get behind the curtain, it's actually the opposite. And it's sort of an enabler of groupthink and conformity.
It's so horrible. And a lot of times the groupthink is around some stupid pop culture thing and whatever. When it gets to politics, it's bad. And I don't care if it's left politics or right politics. Both of them have become crazy. And the younger the demographic is, the crazier. And I have a daughter in Berkeley High. Oh my God, it's almost unimaginably stupid. Like, it's almost, and it's impenetrably stupid. I find myself agreeing with a proposition that I never could have imagined I would support some years ago, which is I think TikTok has to go away or be seriously taken over and transformed. It's just not acceptable. The Bill of Rights can't be a suicide pact. and it can't be let's do massive harm to our own children. It can't be that. It just can't be that. And even that's where I've come down, and it's I don't like being there, but that's where the reality is, and I wish it were different.
Well, I very much agree. Maybe we can open it up to questions here in the room and online.
Great. We're going to start with a question that was submitted in advance from employees across the business, and then open it to the room. If you're joining via Zoom, you can submit a question via the QA feature. But to start, will mankind's creativity be increased or decreased with the advent of AI and its derivatives?
If we keep using the term AI, it will be decreased. If exactly the same code is used in a different mindset, it will be increased.
Thank you.
That's the answer.
Oh, yeah, thanks. So you just touched on, or in one half of manifesto in particular, you warn of the social and the economic implications, right, of a few tech giants having control over the digital landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I guess my question is, when you think of that and the majority of the users becoming kind of like digital serfs, you mentioned this earlier, people are doling out content for free and they're lining the pockets of those few tech giants, right? What can we in society do to, I guess, slow down or mitigate this in some way, aside from, cutting off social media or doing something more extreme? I mean, do you have any suggestions?
Well, so first of all, I'm an executive at the biggest tech giant now, so I don't want to pretend that I'm not a hypocrite. Let's just get that out of the way. On the other hand, what I think some of the tech giants do show is that there can be business models other than just becoming the arbiter of other people's information. Like if you're selling goods and services, then you're participating in a market authentically. And I think for the most part, Microsoft does that, which is why I tolerate my level of hypocrisy to you if you want to. However, a lot of our peer tech giants are not doing that. They're more like every time Meta sells a headset, I'm thinking, great, they're getting into goods and services. Good. You should have a business model that's about goods and services because that's what markets are for. If you're not doing that, something is screwy. You shouldn't just be a gatekeeper. And on the left, leftist economists criticize rent takers. That's an old thing. But I think gatekeepers are worse than rent takers. Whatever you think about the rent taking argument. I personally think finance has been good for civilization, but wherever you land on the spectrum, gatekeeping can't be. It doesn't make sense. So I think the way around that is to fight for individual commercial rights in the information space. So what I would like to see is I would like people to be incentivized and rewarded for the value of data they put online. In order for that to happen, new structures need to emerge that sound leftist but aren't really. There needs to be collective bargaining. And so traditionally, you're talking about labor, you're on the left. Well, no, because a legal partnership is that, a corporation is that, a company is that. That's what we do. Microsoft is that. If it was all of us, if I was out there competing with Satya, I don't know, that wouldn't make sense. You have to have little bubbles of cooperation in order to have a competitive marketplace that makes any sense. If it's each against each, if each individual is the only structure in a marketplace, I think you end up without a creative market. You need to have some kind of coarse graining, is what we call it in the mathy world. But so that needs to happen for data rights, and people need to start to be able to join. We sometimes call them MIDs, or mediators of individual data or data trust or something. There needs to be some way that everybody can join a variety of different sort of bands or brands or whatever of data and be motivated to occasionally add better data and be proud of it, and not just be this anonymous person beholding to the AI, which is really just made of them, you know. And so the more individual commercial, not like just non-commercial rights of like, oh, I should be able to sue for defamation. Well, sure, but you should also be paid, you know, because otherwise, what are we doing with civilization? We're just demonetizing everybody, even though they're still the source of value. I thought we liked market economies. You know, wasn't that part of the idea here? So there has to be individual participation in the market economy, but it has to be mediated through structures or it won't work. That's the future that moderates our tendency towards kind of dumb monopolies and, you know, or pseudo monopolies.
Thanks. We'll take another one from the room.
Hi, so I have two questions regarding the conversation we had earlier about AI and the guidelines that we have around it. So about AI safety. So first, you know, what are your thoughts on AI governance and regulations and the fine balance we have between fostering innovation and having AI safety? And do you want to? So the second one is, I've watched some of your talks and it seems like you have a really deep connection with some of the AI leaders. I would love to learn more about what level of trust do you have in them in terms of AI safety?
Well, okay, so I'm not a remote participant. I'm very much an active participant. One of the problems with AI governance is that the very idea of AI is anti-governance. So if we were saying, could we have large collaborative structure governance, all of a sudden avenues open up. So the language is bad to begin with, because if you're saying, oh, there's this big black box, what's the governance of it? I mean, there's a contradiction there. And so if you have any options to make the black box less black, that's probably the first place to look. So I am in a minority in having that idea and that approach. I believe it makes sense, and therefore there'll be more and more people who see it. I could be wrong, but you know, I really do think it is the sensible approach. Thus far, AI governance has had a bit of a rocky quality, and I think a lot of that is because of the fundamental contradiction and in like wanting the black box to be as black as possible as the first step, and then saying, oh, should there be some governance tacked onto that? Because, you know, it's sort of like saying, we're going to have a democracy, except you won't get to know who you elected. You know, it doesn't make, like, you can't, or there's a marketplace, but you don't get to know what you bought. We're going to have eBay, but you don't get to know what you're bidding on. Like, you can't. Like, there has to be symmetrical information flow, or you can't talk about any kind of participatory system, much less governance. And so some of you might have noticed there was a kerfuffle around governance over at OpenAI, our partners. I was right in the middle of that, and I still don't really understand what happened. And I really do believe, and I'm friends with everybody. You know, I'm friends with some of the people who were ousted. I'm friends with the people who weren't. You know, they're all good people. They're all. I don't think there's a devil there. There are people I disagree with in the way I've described, but there isn't anybody who's like super creepy or anything like that. There really isn't. It's just, I think that the issue is fundamentally that if you have people trying to work together on a cause that's absurdly defined, they're going to be all over the place and it'll be a mess. You know, I think that's our fundamental problem with AI governance. The stuff we're doing with guardrails has been done about as well as it could be. And I think a lot of the people who worry about guardrails worry about something specific. Like they'll worry about a specific kind of safety, or this term alignment, which I think is a bad one because it suggests that the AI is this black box that's alive and it has to be aligned. No, we have to be in charge of our own stuff. Alignment's a bad term, but at any rate, a lot of the stuff that's done under the banner of it is still sensible and I think to the good. I don't think it's a process.
I think we actually are running out of time. Have time for one question, but I'm going to steal the last question. So
Okay.
sorry, Katie. Which is want to end on a positive note. You've said that criticism is the true face of optimism.
Yes.
I love that, and would love to hear you just explain it to the group, and then we can end on a good note here.
Yeah. So for many years, the only thing Americans could agree on that tech was great. Like if we go back to the turn of the century, everybody was like, well, we disagree about everything, left and right hate each other, but we all agree tech's great, tech startups. And then I was out there saying, well, actually we have these problems. I'm like, why are you being a critic on the only thing we agree with? So now tech is still bringing Americans together because the only thing everybody agrees on is that tech is terrible. And so in a way it can
Serves its purpose.
Yeah. So it can sound redundant to be a critic, but I am still of the belief that it is the person who thinks something is worth criticizing who's the true optimist.
I love it.
It's the person who gives up who's the pessimist. It's the person who indulges in mindless utopianism who's the pessimist. To be actively engaged is to see where things could be better. That's optimism.
I love it. We avoid complacency at all costs. Jaron,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you for
Thank you,
having me
everybody.
here.
It's terrific. Thanks.